Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, I want to cover a few things. I'm not going to spend much time talking about the Forest game, nice, easy win, but I want to talk about mostly FFP, and I want to really show people on screen why there's no reason to worry about how much United can spend under new ownership. I believe that for whatever reason, there's some misinformation going on around this. That is not representing the scene and the situation to be the way that it actually is. Talk about what it implies for transfers in terms of possibility, targeting, and what's being looked at. And then finally, talk about if there's a favorite right now for the purchase of Manchester United based on the information we're hearing. If there's someone actually concretely, we could say, leading the race as it stands. So let's move right into this. First things first here. This is, what happened to my highlight? There we go. All right, you're not going to see this on screen. I'm going to put up here, this is from the Swiss Ramble. Let me go all the way to the top. I really recommend, if you're looking for any kind of insights into the finances of these major teams and leagues, this guy publishes things that are really great. But what do I want to show you? First and foremost, where I want to explain is to break down the the revenues of the clubs here and where they're at. I'll do it on this big chart. Here's the Money League revenues, Manchester United being fourth in the world behind City, Madrid, Liverpool, okay, with PSG, Bayern, Barcelona, Chelsea, Tottenham, Arsenal kind of filling up beyond that. So it's really the major clubs from Spain, Germany, France, and then a lot of England who are definitely making the more money here. One thing I want to point out, this breaks down the revenue, and I'm not going to get into too much detail on this, but I just want to show something here before I explain everything else. United have great match day revenues because good stadium, I mean in terms of size, always selling out, a lot of attendance, great match going fans. Broadcasting for United is a bit low. That's this red compared to these other ones, and this is because of loss of a Champions League compared to Liverpool, Madrid, and City. And then commercial has really slowed down. Where United used to be a commercial powerhouse, it's really slowed down, and a big part of this is down to the Glazers and the inability to really drive commercial revenues and sponsorships, mostly because who wants to invest in the Glazers? And so even everything else aside, with Champions League, you increase revenues by about 40. With improved sponsorships and partnerships from new owners, you're likely to bring in more new kit sponsor, all of that. A lot of that could improve the revenues. But here's where what I really want to show and where I want to get to and explain, because it's the point of this entire thing. There's been a lot of stories recently about specifically FFP and its cap and all of that. So let's move down here to wages. Look at PSG at 615 million a year in wages in pounds. Madrid, Barcelona, United, very high. Liverpool, City, and all of that. So if you go down here, this is the amount that matters, is this percentage, 111. You can see PSG is at an insane point. Everton are in trouble. Newcastle, Leicester. Now why? Because they have very low revenues compared to their wages. Juventus, Inter. Here's United at 66%, which is actually quite a good number. And so let's talk about that, 66%. And let me switch over so I can explain here with my face what this FFP rule is. The rule coming up on FFP is that you cannot spend next year more than 90% of your revenues on wages and transfer fees. And those transfer fees are amortized over the length of the contract. So you saw like this thing with Chelsea signing these big signings on 8-year deals. They could stretch that transfer over 8 years. So 100 million, instead of being a 20 million hit, you see, over 5 years, instead becomes a 12 million. Now they're changing that rule specifically to stop them from doing that. So it's still you still have to think about it over a 5-year period. And that's really the way that you want to look at it. So 90% is that cap. Well, United's wages are only at 66% last year. That's where they were at. And then when you factor in transfers and things like that, it goes higher. And I'll show you the exact math on this. But the point being, you cannot exceed 90% of your revenue with wages. That includes signing on fees. That includes all of that, which is built into that number on that website. and your transfer fees. It has to be below that kind of cap. So I actually have a whole thing here that I want to show, kind of breaking this down. Where are you? Where are you? There we go. And I'll explain this. Going into next season, what I've broken down here is based on those last year wages. This is the total of wages lost in £1,000 per week. So that's 1,675. So if you think about it, it's 100, if I'm not mistaken, 1.67 million in wages reduced per week from last season through what departed last season, what's departing this season by the end of the year, including Jones, Tuanzebe, Chong, Lingard, Matic, Pogba, Cavani, Mata, Telles, Grant, Ronaldo, and David De Gea taking reduction. I added in the wages of our signings from last summer, Anthony, Casemiro, Martinez, and Eriksen. There's a little bit more, but it's kind of accounted in there. I'm adding in improved contracts for Shaw, for Rashford, for Dalot. And in the end, what happens is you actually have a reduction in the yearly wages of about 34 million. You had an Ole Gunnar Solskjaer payoff and staff of about 15 million. So you can actually reduce the wages from 21-22 by about a total of 49. This is all a lot of math, but let me break down where the numbers come to. You get your estimated wages for next season to be 336 million before signings. You get your transfers amortized, which is the last 4 years or 5 years over a 5-year period, to be 123 million. You have your total amount that counts toward the FFP of 459 million. With Champions League, you'd have a minimum revenue of 623 million, which puts your cap at 560 million, which means you can spend about 101 million pounds. Now, let me break that down just a little bit further to explain it. That's 101 million amortized. That's 101 million that can be spent, where 101 million in pounds can be broken down in different ways. And this is what I've put up on here. For example, if you buy Ramos for 75, in goalkeeper for 40, and Enzo for 85 in million pounds, all three together, at the end of the day, you only have an amortized total of 40 million, because you've spent what? You've spent 200 million divided by 5 gives you a 40 million in amortized cost. The yearly wages would be 22.5. So you've spent a total of, you've added to that cap 62.5 million in cost. And that's, you have 101 million to spend. You don't have 101 million in cash to spend. You have 101 million in amortized cost up to that cap. Now, you don't want to use all of it because the next year is going down to 80%. So you don't want to go all the way. But this is a doable amount, you see. You could spend 200 million here and you'd be around 85% or something like that, 83%. If you can increase revenues, that gives you a lot more to spend. If you add 20 million in revenue, you have 18 more in amortized cost to spend. Realize that. So a 20 million increase on sponsorships gives you 18 million a year. That's a whole nother 90 million pound purchase in terms of transfer fee. If you go with an even bigger spend, Osimhen, Costa, and Enzo, you might end up spending 77 million. They could spend this. They could spend practically whatever they want next summer, bearing in mind. So you could see a spend of up to 200 million on transfers, even without further sales, even without extra departures. The bigger factor in all of this is cash flow. Can you do it financially? And the fact there is, yes, United cannot right now spend in terms of cash flow. They don't have the money. The Glazers don't have the cash. But a big part of that is the debt. Huge part of it. It's costing them, at this point, over 100 million a year to service that debt, to pay that debt. That's where all the cash is. That's where all the money is. That's where the spending is, and that's where the losses are coming from. So new owner comes in and takes over. I tweeted this out, but every single owner who's looking at taking over wants to wipe the debt clean. Every one of them. This is good news. That means the cash flow is going to be very good. The cash is going to be available to spend, and then they can do whatever they need to with regards to this whole FFP thing. So, I know this can be confusing, but I want to show it again just to make sure it's understood. In the end, the total on wages plus your total on transfers over the last 5 years divided by 5 gives you the amount that counts towards FFP. That total going into next year is $459 million. United can spend up to 90% of their revenues on this, and the revenue is estimated to be a minimum of $623 million, which means that 90% cap is $560 million, which means they have at least about $100 million in amortized cost to spend. Not $100 million. That's not net spend. That doesn't mean they have to go down to a net spend. It's a lot more than $100 million in net spend. If you spent $100 million on transfers, it'd only be an amortized value of $20 million. So there's a lot here. Spendable at 80% is only 40. So you can see why they might want to keep it between, not towards 100, but maybe in between this number. If they can increase revenues to say, by another $630 million, then, this, let me just do the math here. This 40% becomes, just make sure I'm doing this right, 61. So if they can even add 20 million to the revenues, new sponsorship, one player sale, Donny Van de Beek, Dean Henderson, Bailly, then at 80%, you could spend 200 million. You could do this transfer, then at 80%, you could go with this left thing, and you'd be at the 80% cap, which means you'd be prepared for even the following year. So it's not scary. It's not scary at all, and it all comes down to the takeover. The takeover has to occur. They have to pay the debt off to have the cash available, have a bit of an influx of money and investment, not a lot, an influx of money and investment to pay that debt down and off completely, which would be part of the takeover. You would hope that they would come in and bump up revenues with new sponsors, some new partnerships, things like that at the least. But even without that, they could spend the money. Champions League is a big factor in this. It would help a lot. But with Champions League decided, you're looking at somewhere around United being able to spend $200 million. Now, in terms of the takeover and who's the favorite, I've been speaking to some people about this in the area, and it's an interesting thing. Jim Ratcliffe has really played the whole scenario quite well, and at this point, he would appear to be the takeover. There are parties who are kind of gun-shy of going in there. By coming out first, he's gotten a lot of fans on his side who maybe wouldn't have wanted him before, because now you get this narrative of Jim Ratcliffe versus the evil Americans, funnily enough, and so people are going to support Ratcliffe in this. So he's done a really good job kind of getting fans even on side and getting a push for him. But one of the things I wanted to mention in terms of a little bit of a myth about the U.S. owners, there was a information that went out that Arsenal versus Manchester United was the most watched game in the United States ever for a Premier League game, about 1.92 million watchers. That audience could increase 5 to 10 times easily. And that means that the value of, where can the value of Manchester United increase the most? It's in the American markets, where the TV deal now is worth about $270 million a year that's not correct. It's worth about 400 something million a year for the total Premier League. So divided up about 25 million per club. That number could increase by 10 times. An increase in the revenue by 100 to 200 million a year from TV deals in the U.S. market is the biggest opportunity financially for the clubs in the Premier League to increase their revenues, and that's where a lot of focus will be, and that's why there's so much interest from the U.S. If they can expand the American market, they could increase the revenues so significantly that it would become powerhouses of the entirety of Europe. And a club like Manchester United that gets high viewership alongside a club like Arsenal that does get high viewership in the U.S. would become huge powerhouses of football and have the ability to overtake the Madrids of the world and things like that if they can invest properly and build up that American market. And that's why there's a lot of interest from the U.S., and it'll be a focus for any owners coming in where they can build it up, where the club can generate an enormous amount of income on its own. But right now, you could say that Jim Ratcliffe, from people I'm speaking to, is a favorite, is a viable buyer, and is in there. But there are these U.S. firms that are looking at this and thinking they might be able to outbid him because they're saying the value in building up this U.S. market that they're a little more familiar with is so big that the club's value could double or treble in the next 10 years if they do things right. When that next TV deal comes up in 5 years, post-World Cup, in the US, that it could be worth 5 to 10 times as much as it is now. And that's what some of them are looking at the moment. So I'll make sure to keep you updated. We're coming into the end of January, which means in the next week or 10 days, we should expect to see your names and actual bids coming through. The news should get hot and heavy. And the other thing is, you should really, really expect that a full takeover is the likely outcome. It becomes more likely every single day and with every report and every interest that comes out. Okay? I hope this all made sense to you. Leave comments below, ask questions. I know it can be a bit confusing, but I believe we have a good understanding of this. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. See you in the next one.